I'm Jeremiah, and I'm excited to be able to continue a conversation that started last week. As Pastor Keith said to us, our church this year is doing something really significant. Our church this year is stepping into something that we believe is going to be very special and very important for our church. Grab your notes, we're going to jump right in. And he said this, that our church this year, we get to focus our eyes externally and eternally. For our church this year, we get to focus our eyes externally, outside of ourselves, and eternally, thinking about things beyond just this life and this world. And there's a lot of ways to do that. Giving to global things, serving in local things, being in our community and for our community, helping other people. But specifically what we're talking about, that Pastor Keith said, is our church this year is going to be about evangelism. That we're going to be learning how, and we're going to be sharing our faith with other people. Now, I am married to Marcy, and Marcy is what the internet would define as a crunchy mom. Now, by that, what I mean is not that like she crunches when she walks, although we are getting older, but the internet definition of a crunchy mom is somebody who is into all things organic, all things natural, okay? So if it's gluten-free, paraben-free, toxin-free, GMO-free, BPA-free, she wants to try it, okay? So the most recent one that she tried is this deodorant that's not like normal deodorant. So with this stuff, you put coconut oil in your armpits, you wait for that to kind of dry, and then you use this little bamboo paddle to smear this like paste into your armpits that's got herbs and stuff in it. Okay, she smells lovely. But I was in the shower the other day, and she asked me from the other room, she was like, would you want some of this stuff? And I was like, no. Because I know it's good, but for me, ew. And the times before that I haven't said no, I've found myself drinking bone broth, which I know is good, but ew. Well, I've found myself having these things that instead of cling wrap, it's like this beeswax coated pieces of fabric that you press on to the top of things. It's good for the environment. Ew. I found myself doing this smoothie cleanse with like kale and ginger and lemon. I could go on and I could go on. But I know it's good. Ew. Here's the deal. Pastor Keith gets up last week. He goes, great news. This year we get to externally, eternally, evangelism. And I think for a lot of us, we go, I know it's good. Ew. Right? That we felt some kind of way about what our church this year is doing. And the kind of way we felt would not necessarily be described as get to. Why? How do I know that? Because let's look at the definition of get to. Keith gave us this last week. Get to is a spirit of privilege when a task meets a desire. Get to is a spirit of privilege when a task meets a desire. That we would say, here's the task, and I want to, so it's an opportunity, so it's a privilege. And let me just ask us, where are we at on this? Where are we at on the idea of task? I think for all of us, we would go, I get it. I mean, if you're a Christian, we just go, I get it. There's not a debate. God wants us to share our faith with people. Our church is doing this. But here's the question, where are we at on desire? Where are you at on the want to? Maybe you're like, oh, I totally want to. I'm down for this. I can't wait for this. I have great feelings about this. Let's go. Why are we even talking about it? Maybe for you, you're like, no, not for me. I don't like it. I don't want it. I don't feel good about this idea of sharing my faith with other people. I don't want to do it. I'm not for it. But for most of us, for almost all of us, if the question is, where are you at on want to? The answer is, I want to want to. I want to want to. I want to desire that. I want to look at it as a get to, but inside of me there's a hitch. Inside of me there's a catch. There's something kind of below the surface that's keeping me from being able to honestly say I actually really want to. And so in order for us to move forward, we've got to identify what is this roadblock to desire, and we've got to deal with it. We've got to look beneath the surface, underneath desire, to what actually affects desire, to what feeds or kills desire, and look and deal with that. I said it in your notes like this: to win externally and eternally, we have to first win internally. We have to first win internally. We have to go a layer beneath desire into the things that feed or kill desire. And what are those things? What are those internal things? There are feelings. They are our emotions. I asked it at the end of our grace group this last week when we were having a conversation about what Keith had taught us last week. And we said, what's our roadblock? What's our next step? What's the thing standing in our way to being able to move forward in this? And all around the room, the words came: fear, self-doubt, anxiety, emotions. Not positive emotions, but negative emotions. And for us to be able to win externally and eternally, we've got to win internally. Now, a couple things I want to say about emotions, about feelings. Here's some things that are just true about them. Number one, feelings are not an excuse for a Christian to not obey God. Hear me, Christians. No matter how you feel, that is not an excuse to not step into what God gives you. There's no version, if you're a Christian, of standing before God one day and saying to him, Lord, I know you really wanted me to tell people about Jesus, but I'm sure you'll understand, I just really didn't feel like it. That's not how it's going to go. Feelings are not an excuse, but here's what's also true. Feelings are real. They're real, and they will impact how you engage what you engage. They're gonna shape your posture. They're gonna shape either optimism or pessimism. They may make it so you do or don't want to do it. Feelings are real. But here's another thing. You're not a victim to your feelings. In fact, the more mature you are as a Christian, the more you learn the art of not following your heart, but leading your heart. And God says your feelings are not something that just simply, you have to learn how to overcome these things that try to prevent you from doing what's right. There are actually ways God gives us to use our feelings to perpetuate, to make us feel like we want to do what's right. We can lead our feelings. We're not a victim to them. How do we do that? How do we lead our feelings? Well, your feelings go where your focus goes. There's this mindset cycle that we talk about in something that we call R factor here at Grace, and you may have heard it in grace groups or other circles, but the mindset cycle is that first you ask, well, what are you focusing on? And whatever you focus on informs your self-talk. And whatever your self-talk is will inform your feelings, your emotions, and whatever those are is going to translate into your actions. And so there is this relationship between what you focus on and what you feel. Between the story you tell yourself, the narrative you listen to, and your emotions. That's why it is so important to take a really good look at, what are you telling yourself? What are you focusing on? In our culture, we talk a lot about the idea of like the story that you tell yourself and how that impacts the way you engage in things. You'll hear it in parenting. Well, the story you tell yourself in parenting will change the posture you show up to parenting in. It might still be hard, it might still be frustrating, it might still be all those things, but you'll show up differently to it depending on the story you tell yourself. It's the same with engaging hard things. It's the same with sharing your faith. The story you tell yourself matters. And here's what I know about the story you've been telling yourself about sharing your faith. It's going to be awful. It's going to be awkward. They're going to ask me about the dinosaurs. I'm not going to know the answer. They're going to ask me about creation. I'm going to feel dumb. I'm going to feel stupid. I'm going to feel like a hypocrite because of the time last week at work that I bumped into the door and I cussed and everybody heard me do it. And they're going to not want to hear any more about it. I'm going to say something wrong. I'm going to turn them off to this whole thing. I'm going to ruin it. They're never going to want to come to Jesus. It'll all be my fault. Now, maybe not that whole story, but come on. You can pick out pieces of that you go, yeah, that's part of what I've been telling myself about the idea of talking about Jesus with people. No wonder you're feeling the feelings you feel about it, if that's the story that you've been telling yourself. And for us to win internally, we've got to take a good look at the narrative we're allowing to shape our emotions. we've got to take a good look at the story that we're telling ourselves, because here's just what's true. This is what your church is doing. If you're a part of Grace, we're moving into this. We're stepping into this. And the story you tell yourself is going to be your biggest enemy or your biggest ally to what lies ahead of you. You are going to hate what comes next or love what comes next, depending on the story you tell yourself. You're going to lean in and say, yes, teach me, train me, I want to do this, I'm excited about it, I'm optimistic about it, or you're going to want to figure out a reason to skip Grace Group, skip church, lose that little book somewhere, depending on the story you tell yourself about what sharing the gospel really is and isn't. And I want to put in front of us today a very different story that I think will produce very different feelings about sharing our faith. And it's found in the book of 1 Corinthians. If you have a Bible, you can open there. If you don't have a Bible, we've got yours waiting for you at Grace Central. But we're going to go to 1 Corinthians in chapter 3. And before we get there, I just want to set up a little bit of kind of the context for this. Paul is talking to the church in Corinth. Now, Paul had gotten there first, and he told them about Jesus. And then another guy named Apollos came around, and he continued to tell them about Jesus. Then a problem broke out in the church, and the problem was this. Some people in the church are like, I follow Paul. Other people in the church are like, I follow Apollos. And Paul is writing this, and he's going, stop it, that's stupid. And as he gives them the reasons why they shouldn't put the focus on him or Apollos, he unrolls to us, like, what's the way he looks at evangelism? What's the story Paul tells himself about sharing the gospel? Now, why do we care what Paul tells about sharing the gospel? Because remember, the narrative you tell produces the feelings you feel. And if you asked me, Jeremiah, who's the person in the whole Bible who has like the best feelings about sharing Jesus with people? I'd go, it's Paul. It brought him so much joy. It was his life's passion. He loved it. It satisfied him. He was driven to do it. And so if those kinds of emotions could come out of the story we tell ourselves, then let's take a look at the story. And let's see how Paul describes the reality of what it really is like to share the gospel with people. Let's pick it up in chapter 3, verse 5 of 1 Corinthians. He goes, what after all is Apollos, and what is Paul? Don't pay attention to us. Don't break into these factions saying, I follow one, I follow the other. What are we anyway? We're only servants through whom you came to believe. He's like, yes, you came to believe in Jesus through me. But that doesn't make me anything special. I'm just a servant. I'm just doing my job. Well, what is the job? And who is he really accountable for in the job? He says it in the next verse. We're just servants as the Lord has assigned to each his task. We're serving God by telling people about Jesus. The task is telling people about Jesus. Now here's where we start to put a whole bunch of stuff into the story, is in this idea of like, but what is the task? And how hard is the task? And how scary is the task? And how bad is that task going to go? And am I equipped for the task? Do I have enough to be able to do the task? Am I qualified for the task? All of those questions. Let's look at what Paul describes as the task of sharing Jesus with people. He says this, I planted the seed, Apollos watered it. That sounds pretty simple, right? I was there first, and so I planted the seed. Apollos came next, and so he watered the seed. He describes the gospel as this seed. And we all know, just from this agricultural illustration, that like planting and watering a seed it's a simple thing. It's a thing that happens sometimes in a moment. But over the course of a plant's life, there are a lot of those little moments. It might be a moment you come back to time and time and time again, but every one of those moments is either planting or watering. Planting or watering. And look what Paul says, I planted the seed, Apollos watered it, but check this out, God has been making it grow. Okay, we know this, but let's just say it out loud. Do planters make the plants grow? No, God makes the plants grow. Do waterers make the plants grow? No, God makes the plants grow. He's like, it's not about the planter or the water. In fact, he says it really clearly in this next verse. Check this out. So neither the one who plants, nor the one who waters is anything, but only God who makes things grow. It's not about me and what I do. It's about God and what he does. Pastor Keith said it last week. I'm going to say it today. We're going to hear it again over and over. You don't save anybody. I don't save anybody. Paul says he didn't save anybody. Pastor Keith doesn't save anybody. Nobody gets saved. Nobody grows in a relationship with Jesus unless the Holy Spirit of God moves in their hearts, brings truth to life, helps them to understand what's being said, convicts them of sin, draws them into a relationship with Jesus Christ. That doesn't happen from planters and waterers. It happens from God who makes things grow. But nothing grows that's never been planted. Nothing grows that's never been watered. Okay, so he's like, on the one hand, he's saying, it's not me, I'm not a big deal, it's not about me. On the other hand, he's saying, while I'm not putting the focus on my part to play, I am saying I play a part in something that's really significant. I play a part in God making things grow. My part is planting and it's watering. And he says this next. He says, the one who plants and the one who waters, they have one purpose. Another translation would say they are one in purpose. He's like, Paul and Apollos are teammates. Paul and Apollos are partners. I wasn't there when he was there, and he wasn't there when I was there, but we were both doing the same thing, and that makes us partners. Just like you, get this is something really cool. Whenever you share Jesus with somebody, you have just in that moment partnered with every other person who ever shared Jesus with that person. You partner with every other person who will share Jesus with that person. He's like, that's what's going on. Like, we're partnering together in this purpose. You know what else is amazing? You just partnered with God. Because again, God's the one who makes things grow, but stuff doesn't grow without planters and waterers. And he goes, partnering with all the other planters and waterers, partnering with God, that is my purpose. It's my purpose. My purpose is to partner with God in this God-sized dream that through me and every other planter and waterer in the earth, we together are going to fill the earth with these seeds that sprout and grow, with these people who come to faith in Jesus and grow, and then tell other people about Jesus, and the earth is going to be full of God's glory because everybody's going to know, and that's my dream, and that's my purpose. He says, that's what I'm here for. I'm not a big deal, but this job is a big deal. It's not a big deal because of how I do it. It's a big deal because I'm partnering with God who makes things grow. And look at this. And they will each be rewarded according to their own labor. God doesn't just assign the task. He doesn't just make the thing grow. He doesn't just superintend the process. He rewards the planters and waterers for their labor, not for their results. I think sometimes we freak out because we're like, God's going to reward based on how it goes. No, God's going to reward when you obediently step in and do the task that he assigned you to do. He rewards. There's only a few times in Scripture that God explicitly says, I reward people for this. And sharing Jesus with others is one of them. If Jeff Bezos, and we think of the money that guy has, and he said, I'm offering rewards, we would go, pay attention. Like, that guy's pretty loaded. I'd like to know what kind of reward that would be because of how rich he is. Think of how rich the king of all the universe is, and he goes, I'm offering a reward. We probably ought to figure out how to get in line. And Paul says, here's how you get in line. Tell people about Jesus. God rewards it. God rewards the faithfulness, not the results. Okay, what's the story we tell ourselves about evangelism? It's going to be hard. It's going to be awkward. I'm not going to know what to say. What's the emotions that come on the other side of that? Fear, anxiety, self-doubt, insecurity, hesitation. What's the story that Paul told? What's the narrative he gave? I plant, I water, I do the job God sets in front of me. God's the one who makes things grow, not me. So it's on him, it's not on me. And by the way, he rewards me every time I do it. What's the emotions that come out of that? Joy, a sense of freedom, a sense of expectation, passion, a deep connection with his purpose. For us to win externally and eternally, we first have to win internally. We have to make sure that we're telling ourselves the right story that produces the right emotions about sharing the gospel with people. I said it to you like this. I'm going to say it and then unpack it. Friends, you got to let your faith shape your feelings about sharing your faith. You got to let your faith shape your feelings about sharing your faith. The right story is going to produce the right feelings. The wrong story is going to produce the wrong feelings. And you get to pick the story you listen to. Let your faith shape your feelings about sharing your faith. For the sake of this conversation, I want to be really clear on what I mean by let your faith shape your feelings. Faith is the lifelong practice for a Christian of believing God's truth and preaching it to myself. Believing God's truth and preaching it to myself. Right? For the Christian, we seek God's truth, we surround ourselves with God's truth, but we also choose, I'm going to believe God's truth and I'm going to preach it to myself. When we do that, let your faith shape your feelings about sharing your faith. It doesn't take too good of a coach to look at his team before a big game and to see in their eyes and in their posture whether they are like in their heads in a bad way about this game, whether they're psyching themselves out. And the coach, again, he doesn't have to be too smart to know, play the movie forward, this isn't going to go well. Because they're not going to play up to their potential. They're not going to play the way I know they can play if they're in their heads in a bad way. This is why this conversation is so important for us right now. Because we're about to step into some things where we're going to be able to actually put feet on the ground of sharing the gospel with people, where we're going to actually be able to say, we're equipping you, we're helping you see what an opportunity is, and take that opportunity and all of that. And here's what I know. If you're psyching yourself out thinking it's going to be awful, you're never going to play to your potential. If you're letting the wrong things shape your feelings about sharing your faith, you're never going to play to your potential. We need to let our faith shape our feelings about sharing our faith. And when we do, those feelings are going to be so different, and the way we engage it is going to be so different. Okay, so what does faith say? If we're supposed to let our faith shape our feelings about sharing our faith, what does faith say? Number one, out of this passage, faith says this: it's obedience in the moment, not ownership of the process. It's obedience in the moment, not ownership of the process. Paul says we're given a task, we're assigned a task. We are obedient to that task, God rewards us. And what is it? We plant, we water, we're obedient in the moment. We don't own their response, we don't own their process, we don't own their future. We're obedient to God in the moment that he puts in front of us. In the recruiting world, some ways that some companies do this, if a recruiter connects to a candidate at any point in their process, then that recruiter owns the rest of that candidate's process. Everything from here until forever goes back to that recruiter. So if that candidate doesn't file the right paperwork in their next step, it's on that recruiter. If that person doesn't show up to training, it's on that recruiter. And forevermore and always, you're married to this person, that it's going to come back and it's going to be on you. I think we feel that way about sharing our faith with somebody. That maybe some of the reason we're hesitant to even start the conversation is because we've already played 10 years forward into going, I don't know that I want to be responsible with what happens when 5 years from now they stop believing in Jesus, or when they misunderstand something, or when they backslide, or when they et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Guys, you don't own their process. You don't own their response. You don't own everything in their future. But God says, be obedient to the moment that I put you in front of. Paul was like, I plant the seed, I water the seed. I'm a servant, I do my assignment. Now here's the thing. Some plants you're going to encounter once and never again. That's the typical like airplane story, right? We're all afraid of what's going to happen when we're sitting by somebody on an airplane. Maybe God will ask you to plant a seed or water a seed in that moment. Some plants God puts in your office, and every Monday you water that plant. Some plants God puts in your house. Here's what I'm saying. There's differing levels of responsibility to be like, I'm taking responsibility to be a waterer with this person. Your kids are a great example. That moment is 18 years. That moment is all that time that they're under your roof, and then everything after that, that you're always going to be planting, you're always going to be watering, and you're going to be praying for the people who partner with you in that planting and watering when they go, right? Each one of those moments, though, is about obedience to God, not their response, not their future, not their outcome. Why? Because you're not responsible for that. You don't own their response or their process. You own obedience to God in that moment. And that might be a lot of moments. It might be a moment that lasts a long time. But in that moment, you're planting, you're watering. You're just planting, you're just watering. I'm not trying to make it sound more simple than it actually is or more easy than it actually is, but I am trying to take it back from you who have made it sound more hard than it actually is. In the moment, be obedient to what God's asking you to do. Plant, water. And we're all like, well, if I had my way, the way I would plant is I'd throw some seed and be gone, right? Water real quick and make it easy. Sometimes watering and planting is saying a hard thing. It's standing up for your faith in a certain situation. Sometimes watering and planting looks like giving an apology and going, you know what, you might not know this about me, but I'm a Christian, and the way that I acted in that moment wasn't reflective of my faith, and I just wanted to say that I'm sorry. Sometimes it's inviting somebody to church. Obedience in the moment is part of the task, and he assigns the task, but you're just obedient to the moment. You don't own their whole process. God is not out to overwhelm you. God is not out to set you up to fail. God is out to prop you up to be able to obey him in the moment that he brings you to. His divine power has given us everything we need for life and godliness through our knowledge of him who called us by his own glory and goodness. So I want to ask you a faith question. Do you believe God can give you what you need to obey him in a moment? Yes or no? Then let your faith shape your feelings about sharing your faith. And when you do, it's not overwhelmed, it's confidence. I can do this. What else does faith say? Number 2, faith says, this depends on God's sovereignty, not my skill. This depends on God's sovereignty, not my skill. Sovereignty, God's ultimate control and power over all things. Over all things. God's sovereignty means he's in charge of your life and their life, your future, their future. He's in charge of everything, and he puts planters and waterers in situations, and he sovereignly orchestrates and superintends all the things that happen. And ultimately, a seed taking root in a person's life depends on God's sovereignty, not your skill. When my oldest daughter was in first grade, we got 2 significant stories home about her that year. The first one was when we heard that she had said to a boy who had been bothering her, she said, you better stop or my daddy will come to school tomorrow, throw you up against a wall and punch you in the face. The second one was something that we heard much after the fact from the teacher. And the teacher said this. She said, a while ago at school, your daughter asked me, do I love God? Public school. And the teacher said, I actually told her, yes, I do love God. And then your daughter said, do you go to church? And I said, no, I don't go to church. Well, then later that day, your daughter came up to me and said, I'm sad. Because I think if you don't go to church, you don't love God. Bold. Probably not the evangelism strategy I would say to lead with. But then she said this. She said, I couldn't get out of my mind what your little girl said. A couple weeks later, I decided I would go ahead and start to go to church. I went to church. I got around God's word. I got around God's people. That had its effect on me. I recommitted my life to Christ. I'm following Jesus now. And she goes, I just wanted you to know your little girl is a part of that story. Now, if you're clapping because you're thinking, what an amazing girl, you missed the point. We should hear that story and think, what an amazing God. That he would see this person and love this teacher so much that he would go, I'm going to put a little 6-year-old with no tact into your class. And I'm going to make her say something that in other circumstances would just go bad, but I'm going to use it because I'm sovereign. That she just watered a seed in that moment. Other people came afterwards. They watered those seeds. And you know who made all of that work together? God, who is sovereign. And if he can use a little kid in a first grade classroom, he can use you in your office. He can use you in your carpool. He can use you at the fire station. He can use you. He can use you. And if he's sovereign enough to put you in that situation, don't you think he's sovereign enough to know what you do and don't know? Don't you think he's sovereign enough to know what you are and aren't good at yet, what you are and aren't ready for? He's sovereign. It's not about your skill, it's about his sovereignty. Now, listen, maybe you say back to me, Jeremiah, does it matter at all? Like, are there more and less helpful ways to share the gospel? Yes. Are there good ways and bad ways to share my faith? Yes. Will I get more skill as I practice doing this? Yes. Does it matter how we engage, like the books and the conversations and the teaching that we're going to get in the next couple weeks as we learn how to increase our skill in this? Yes, all of that matters. All of it's good. All of it's helpful. But ultimately, it's not good because it puts the focus on the part you play. It's good because look what you get to play a part in. It's not about your skill. It's about his sovereignty. It's about his sovereignty. I want to ask you a faith question. Do you believe in a sovereign God who can use whoever he wants, whenever he wants, however he wants to accomplish his purposes? Yes or no? Do you believe that also applies to you? Then let your faith shape your feelings about sharing your faith. And when we do, we're not hesitant, we're not uncertain, we're not full of anxiety. We might even be full of curiosity. What are you going to do with this? Because it's not about my skill, it's about his sovereignty. All right, what else does our faith say? Last one is this. Our faith says what I will gain matters more than what I might lose. What I will gain matters more than what I might lose. What do we gain? Paul says there's a reward. A reward for everyone according to their labor. A reward for faithfully doing what God says and sharing the gospel with people. He rewards it. That's what we gain. But I think we put focus way too often on what I might lose. I might lose this friendship, right? Because it might get weird, it might get awkward. So this friendship might never be the same. I might lose this friendship. I might lose my credibility because I don't know the answer. I might lose my sense of dignity because I embarrass myself in the conversation. I might lose. And you know what? When you're asking the question about, might I lose this? I would just say, you might. You might lose those things. I don't know. It might happen. You know what else might happen? They might be really thankful that you cared about them enough to talk to them about this. They might lean in and want to hear more. They might not be interested right now, but 6 months down the road when something changes in their life and they remember that you were the one who talked to them about it first, they come back to you and go, tell me more because I'm ready now. Might, don't know. But Paul goes, I'm putting my focus on what I will gain, not on what I might lose. What I will gain, not on what I might lose. If you go to an arcade, you're one of two types of people. You're a person who plays for fun, or you're a person who plays for tickets. Now, if you're a person who plays for tickets, it's because you want that you want to win, you want to stack them up, you want to get as many as you can, you want them to be, just those lines of tickets overflowing out of your pockets. You want to walk up to that counter at the end and you want to go, what do I get for 50,000 tickets? And they go, a chapstick. And you're like, yes. You want tickets. Okay, if you're a person who wants tickets, then I think we kind of all know the trick on how to get the most tickets, but just in case you haven't heard, skee ball. That's where it's at. I don't know why they haven't fixed this. I don't know why it's the same everywhere, but skee ball is awesome because you roll a really great game and 25 tickets. Next round, you roll a really bad, embarrassing game. You're like, man, I hope nobody was watching that. Ugh. 25 tickets. Good, bad, you win. Feel good about it. Feel embarrassed about it. You win. Good score, bad score, you win. All right, let's bring it back to sharing our faith. Whether it goes good or it goes bad, God says, I reward you, you win. Whether they reject you, whether they reject their message, whether they lean in, whether they fall down on their knees and accept Jesus Christ in that moment, doesn't matter. You win. Why? Because God rewards those who share their faith. You will gain in that moment. You will win in that moment. Regardless of how it goes, you win. And it just presses the question, which matters more? What you might lose or what you will win? Which matters more? What happens between you and that person or what happens between you and your God? Which matters more? And by the way, what happens between you and that person, it's a risk. You might lose. And if you do, worst case scenario, you're going to live with those consequences for the rest of your life here on earth. When it comes to what you will gain and the reward you get from this God who blesses you, you're going to live with that reward and enjoy that reward for all of eternity. Which matters more? Which matters more? And so I want to just ask us a faith question right now, and the question is this. Do you believe that a reward from God matters more than a rejection from man? Then let your faith shape your feelings about sharing your faith. Then we're not hesitant and we're not fearful, but instead we're expectant and we look forward to a reward that we will surely receive from God. Let your faith shape your feelings about sharing your faith. To win externally and eternally, we have to first win internally. We have to believe and preach to ourselves that what God says is the truth. Believe God's truth and preach it to ourselves. I want to just take a piece of God's truth and put it in front of us right now. Because we've been talking about how we feel about sharing our faith. I want to show you how God feels about us sharing our faith. I'm going to read from a passage in Romans 10. You don't have to turn there. Look at this. For everyone who calls on the name of the Lord will be saved. And then he goes through this list and he goes, but how can they call on the one they've not believed in? And how can they believe in the one of whom they've not heard? And how can they hear without someone preaching to them? And how can anyone preach unless they are sent? As it is written, pause, time out. How does God feel about us sharing our faith? These are the next words. How beautiful are the feet of those who bring good news. How does God feel about us sharing our faith? He thinks it's beautiful. He's like, I love it. I want to watch it. I want to lean in. It moves me. It's beautiful. Now, some of us were like, beautiful? Does that mean I look pretty when I do it? Like, do I want to be known as beautiful? What do you mean by beautiful? I mean like beautiful moment, like moment of a lifetime. Like the moment, if you're a parent, that you saw your child be born, beautiful. It's beautiful. Like, not like if your team wins the Super Bowl, but like if you're on the team that wins the Super Bowl, beautiful. Life-shaping, awesome, life-changing moment. And he's like, that's how I feel about people who bring the good news. Look, not how beautiful is the good news. How beautiful are the feet. How beautiful are the messengers? How beautiful are the sent ones? How does God feel about people who share their faith? Write this down. Gospel bringers are beautiful. Gospel bringers are beautiful. People who introduce others to Jesus are beautiful. Every name mentioned in that video we saw before this talk, those people are beautiful. People who figure out how to bring up Jesus in a conversation with somebody that they care about are beautiful. You investing in your children and teaching them about Jesus is beautiful. You taking somebody out to coffee and unpacking Jesus is beautiful. How beautiful are the gospel bringers. And I don't know if we've solved your emotion today or not. I hope this has helped. I know it helped me. But at the end of the day, whatever you're still feeling about this, that's like, ew. Believe God's truth and preach it to yourself. Gospel bringers are beautiful. This is so beautiful that God calls you to it. He says, partner with me in it. I will reward you for it. It's beautiful. And so I want to ask us for our homework this week, not to do something that is in addition to what we're already doing, right? Because we're already getting ready to read these books. We're getting ready to be talking in our grace groups. We're getting ready to be equipped by Keith next week. I'm not going to add anything to that, but I want to address our posture in it. I want to ask you that as we step into these next steps ahead of us, that you would believe God's truth and preach it to yourself. What do I mean? Believe that what's ahead is going to be beautiful. Believe that what's ahead is going to be beautiful. In order to win externally and eternally, we have to first win internally, and winning internally is believe that what's ahead is going to be beautiful. And then, when you lock that in, then when you step into opening your books, your posture is going to be a lot different. Then when you step into coming to church next week and Keith begins to give us the blocking and tackling of sharing our faith, you're moving in that space, believing this is going to be beautiful. Believing God's truth and preaching it to yourself. He says it's beautiful. Guys, this is going to be beautiful. People are going to get to hear the greatest news ever that's going to change their whole eternity. God is going to get incredible glory through this because people are telling about the Son. And you are going to get to be a critical piece of that. As you share Jesus with people, share your faith with people. And when it happens, guys, it's going to be beautiful. Believe it. Step into it with optimism, with confidence, believing that God is going to bless it. He's going to reward it. He's going to superintend it. He's going to make it grow. And He's going to give you the chance to be a part of something beautiful. Beautiful. Let's move into what's next with a get-to attitude, believing it's truly going to be beautiful. Let's pray together. God, you are so incredible and generous that you not only invite us to know you, but you invite us to invite people to know you. That like the goodness doesn't stop with just knowing you, but it continues into being able to experience all the joy and the passion and the reward and the excitement of making you known. That we get to have a front row seat to people receiving the thing they need most, and what we need most, it's you. God, would you please shift in our hearts what needs to shift so that we really engage what's next with a get-to mindset. That we wouldn't just be convinced it's right, that we wouldn't just show up saying, I'm committed to do it, but that we would be compelled, believing this is really going to be beautiful and wanting to be a piece of it. Lord, I pray that we would believe this, we would feel this in the depths of us, and we would be passionate and ready and confident for what you've got ahead of us in Jesus' name. Amen.